Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be. This is Mike, and this is Mike Dell's World number 432 for November 26, 2025. And of course, it's the 26th day of NaPodPoMo, National Podcast Posting Month. And I'm on track to actually finish it this year. So, and I think I got some pretty good content this year. And, some of it I've covered in the past, of course, but, a lot of my listeners haven't been around that long. And even though I've been doing this for 20 years, a lot of people, maybe not even alive 20 years, or at least not listening to podcasts that long. Maybe not this one anyway. I don't know. Anywho, today I'm going to talk about something not Northern Michigan related directly or even indirectly. I lived in Keflavik, Iceland in the early 90s for an entire year. And I just want to tell you some of my memories of the place. Now, I'm sure it's changed a lot. It's become more of a tourist trap for Europe. But back in the 90s, it was pretty untouched. I mean, there was obviously people there. There's a big city there, well, big-ish city. Reykjavik, which is the capital. And then, of course, I lived in Keflavik, Iceland, which is the home of the big international airport and the, at the time, NATO base. It was actually a U.S. Navy run air station, Keflavik Naval Air Station, Iceland. And I was, of course, Air Force, and we had a we had a contingent of Air Force people there, plus there were people from all the different countries. There were Marines, there were obviously a lot of Navy. They had a P3 wing or squadron or a couple of squadrons up there. And of course, we had a Fighter Interceptor Squadron, the 57th, the Black Knights of Iceland. That's what our squadron patch was. I still have the hat hanging on the wall over here. From the Knights. And of course, I've got my patch collection. One of these days, I'm going to make a shadow box with all the patches in it and rank and whatnot. But anywho, I was stationed up there for an entire year, and it was an interesting place to live. Now, this, mind you, is before the internet. And this was before, worldwide almost free calling and, video conferencing and, all the stuff that the internet brought. This was before that. And, I guess I'll tell you the story from where it all started. So here I am in Mountain Home, Idaho, working on F-111s, and I get orders to Galena Air Station, Alaska. And Galena Air Station, Alaska is right on the Yukon River, and, it's outback Alaska. It is out there, the only way in and out of there is either by the river or by airplane. And it was not even a Galena Air Station. It was Galena Airport, Alaska. It wasn't even an air station, but they did have a Fighter Interceptor contingent there. They usually had I think it was two F-15s on interceptor duty on call all the time. And that's where I was going to go because I had put in for a short tour. I just wanted to get out of Mountain Home. I'd been there for 7 years and it was time. And anyway, for whatever reason, I got those orders canceled. I didn't. The Air Force canceled those orders on a Monday. And on Tuesday, I had orders to Naval Air Station Keflavik. So they were bound and determined to send me somewhere cold, which was fine, And come to find out, Iceland wasn't that cold. But that's a whole other story. I'll keep talking here. So anyway, I had to go to school in Florida to learn the F-15 electrical and environmental systems, of which I worked on. And so I got to go to school at Tyndall Air Force Base in the Panhandle, Florida. The only problem was this was, I think, July 20th or something like that. And I had to report down there no later than August 10th. So I had to out-process Mountain Home, get myself down to, well, the option was to fly to Florida, do the school, fly back to Idaho, out-process, move out, and then, make all the arrangements to have my stuff stored and shipped and blah-de-blah, all the normal stuff. Well, I kind of flipped the script on him. I said, well, let me out-process here. I'll drive to Florida with all my stuff, and then I'll ship stuff. I lived in the barracks at the time. I didn't have all that much stuff. I had a pickup truck. Had plenty of room to put all my stuff. Furniture and nothing. I was renting a place. And like I said, it was just, personal stuff. So that's what I did. So I out-processed really quick in Idaho, drove to Florida, did the school, and then drove home. I took a little leave in between and drove home and stored my truck. And I had all my stuff shipped from Florida to Iceland. That worked out fine. And, that's how I ended up in Iceland. So I left Traverse City on a flight to Philadelphia. And from Philadelphia, I flew to Keflavik, Iceland on a DC-8. Even then, this was, in the early 90s, even then a DC-8 was an old airplane. In fact, they just retired the final DC-8 that was flying for Samaritan's Purse, which is a charity that goes and, helps out when big storms happen or whatever. But they just retired their DC-8. That was the last DC-8 flight. Anyway, so I flew 7 hours in an airplane that was older than me, which I guess at that point everything was older than me. But I froze my toes off and roasted up top. The thing didn't have a very efficient heating system, but hey, we got there. But the funny thing was that it was on Hawaiian Airlines. So you never think that you're going to be flying from Philadelphia to Keflavik, Iceland on the on Hawaiian Airlines. Oh my gosh. So that was quite the adventure. And we took off at 7 p.m. I think it was. I don't remember the exact time, but we ended up landing in Keflavik at 7 a.m. And of course, the big time change. And they kept us up in processing till like 2 or 3 in the afternoon before I got to my barracks room. Got signed in there and got to go to sleep. But I sleep good on airplanes, so I had plenty of sleep. My day was definitely screwed up. And clearing customs in Iceland was pretty easy. No big deal there. And so I was assigned to the 57th CRS, Component Repair Squadron, which did all the in-shop maintenance on the F-15s at the time. And before that was F-4s, I guess. But I was there when the F-15s were there. And we did, phased inspections and, all the stuff, all the electrical, all the environmental, all the stuff. But we weren't part of the actual on-call Fighter Interceptor Squadron, except for once in a while we would have to take our turn at what we called FISneyland, Fighter Interceptor Squadron, FIS, F-I-S, and the area of the base where the alert barn was called FISneyland. Of course, the military, we make up names for different things. But, all the military stuff was pretty standard, except for, Iceland being Iceland. It was a little harder to get parts and a little harder to, keep things flying. But, we did. We had like 18 F-15s and everything kept flying pretty good. And we always had 4 on call, and they would go out loaded chase bear bombers through the straits there in the northern Atlantic. But nothing too crazy there. Some of the other things that were interesting, that was about the time that computers were starting to be a thing. And I went to the Navy Exchange there and bought a 286 PC computer with DOS 5 on it. And boy, I was styling. I had 1 megabyte of RAM and a 40 megabyte hard drive. And I mean, that was the stuff, man. I would play Flight Sim and Sim City, and we had this drag racing game that I would play, and I had some friends, a Navy guy that lived in the same barracks, and another friend of mine lived in another barracks nearby that I worked with, and we would trade software, and we got a bootleg copy of DOS 6, and oh my gosh, we were styling. We could use more than the 640K of memory for primary memory with DOS 6, a memory manager. Anyway, this isn't a geeky show, but we did an awful lot of computer stuff, but no internet. Whenever I made phone calls off the island was I would do collect calls or not collect calls. I don't know how that worked exactly, but I would. It was $1.06 a minute back to the States. And of course, we didn't make a lot of phone calls because of that, because it was expensive. And, at that time, mail was really important. And, being that Iceland was a pretty boring duty station when you were off duty, I mean, we had nice clubs, and the food was great. Even off base, I would fly to Iceland specifically to get one of their hot dogs. Well, actually, I'd have to get more than one, but the Icelandic hot dog is legendary. It's really good. Call it a pilsa, as I remember it. But I digress. And what was I talking about? Jeez, kind of lost my train of thought there. Oh, yeah. Mail being really, really, really important. I volunteered to work at the base post office. And the funny thing about mail there is it was contingent on what we called the tater or the rotator. And that was that Hawaiian Airlines DC-8 Combi. It had cargo in the front half of the airplane and passengers in the back half of the airplane. And that's where all the mail came in. So it would come in from the States on Wednesdays. So on Wednesday afternoon, I worked second shift. So Wednesday afternoon, I'd go over to the post office and sort mail for a while and then go to work. And then the next day, finish sorting the mail. I wasn't the only one working there, but it took a day or two to do that. And of course, that post office was the busiest place on base on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And then the rest of the week, nothing was going on there, really. People could ship stuff out, but it wouldn't leave until the rotator left on Wednesday afternoon. Or was it Thursday morning? I forget. But anyway, it was once a week. We had mail coming in and out, at least from the States. We had another airplane that went back and forth to London that we'd get some stuff that way too. But for the most part, it all came from Philadelphia. And another thing that was really, 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 really valuable up there was magazines. And current magazines were even more ridiculously important because it really wasn't a lot of reading material. The library on the base was busy all the time because, not much else to do. We did have a cable TV in the barracks, and we would get, we call it AFARTs. Okay, military. They love to have it, but it was Armed Services Radio and Television Service or whatever, and that was we had a couple of AFARTs channels. One of them that would play the Today Show, the Tonight Show, and, a few other things. And then they would always have the live sports. Of course, live sports when you're on GMT time was at oddball times of the day. But I worked second shift, so I'd get home in the morning and the Tonight Show would be on. And then about noon, the Today Show would come on, something like noon, 1 o'clock. So if I was still up at that time, I would watch the Today Show. But it was, TV and radio. And then we had like 2 or 3 other stations. We had BBC out of England, and we had RTL4 out of the Netherlands, and that was in Dutch mostly. And then we had Sky News and Sky Sports. So, there was like 4 or 5 channels, something like that. So that was another pastime. Plus, we had day rooms in the barracks, and we had on the second floor was a full kitchen. So if you wanted to cook your own stuff, you'd go over to the commissary, get stuff, and cook it down there. But of course, that was always crowded, and so I didn't do that much. I'd just eat at Chow Hall. Chow Hall was good. We also had a Wendy's on the base, of all things. Or I would go over to the barber shop, and there was a little barber shop there, and there was also a hot dog stand. Well, guess what I ate an awful lot of was Icelandic hot dogs. But for breakfast, I'd go over to the Chow Hall. And the Navy food wasn't as good as the Air Force food, but it was okay. I didn't mind it. When I was pulling alert duty over on the Air Force side, at FISneyland, they had a Air Force Chow Hall over there, so the food was better. Again, military food, not terrible, but not top notch. And then, of course, eat at Wendy's, and there was also in the Air Force, we call it AFIS. Army Air Force Exchange Service had a snack bar, but I forget what the Navy called it in the Navy Exchange. But it was, a snack bar. You get a slice of pizza or a hamburger or hot dog or whatever. They didn't have the Icelandic type hot dogs, so I never ate hot dogs there. But again, are you sensing a theme? I like the Icelandic hot dog. But it was cool. Iceland was one of the few places on the planet I remember that had handrails on the sidewalks. And the reason for that, we would have crazy straight line winds across the North Atlantic. We were kind of right in the jet stream, or the, what do they call that? Not the jet stream, but where the ocean currents come north. And that kept the island a little warmer than you might think. The winters here in Traverse City, especially in 1978, but in the 90s, it was often warmer in Keflavik, Iceland, near the Arctic Circle in the winter than it was here in Traverse City. I'd have my weekly call with my folks, and they were always say, oh, well, it's 20 degrees here. And, it'd be 35 degrees and windy, and really windy. But those handrails on the sidewalk keep you on the sidewalk. It was not unusual in the middle of the night. I lived in a barracks building, and there was another barracks building, 3-story barracks building, and then there was dumpsters in between. It was not uncommon for the wind to blow the dumpsters over at night. You just hear this big crash. And I remember one time we had a high wind warning, and that's really odd for up there because it's always high wind, but this was really high wind. It was 103 miles an hour sustained for over 2 hours. And it had snowed, and there was a little ice on the parking lot at the barracks, and all the cars blew to one end of the parking lot. It blew the cars around in the parking lot. It was crazy wind. Geez, I talked about that yesterday with the blizzard of 78. But similar wind conditions, but a lot less snow. So we didn't get a lot of snow there, which, like I said, being near the Arctic Circle, you would think you would, but we didn't. Being that it was in the Gulf Stream, that's what I'm thinking. Not the. Was it? Is that what I said the first time? Oh, the jet stream. Yeah, jet stream's in the air. Gulf Stream's on the ground or in the water, and we were we were in probably both. But it was crazy. But another thing that I remember was really popular was the USO Club, and that happened to be, kind of in between the two barracks buildings where I lived. And they used to have fish fry over there on Friday nights, and that Icelandic cod was swimming earlier that day. Yeah, so it was probably the best fish fry I've ever been to. I'm traveling on my I'm traveling on my stomach here. I do remember eating there. They also had a really good half-pound hamburger, so I did eat a lot of meals there at the USO, or the USO. Of course, military, got to have names for stuff. And another thing that, most people didn't bother with getting a car up there, but I wanted to do some exploring, and there was a gal in my shop that was rotating back to the States, and she had a car called a Skoda 120. It was a really weird looking little square box car, like some sort of Fiat, but the engine was in the back, but it had a radiator up in the front, and it had studded snow tires on it. And she sold it to me for $600. I drove that thing for probably 8 or 9 months. And then when I got ready to rotate out, I sold it for $600. And it was really interesting in Iceland with the cars. You had to leave your headlights on all the time. And if you were on an international driver's license, instead of an Icelandic driver's license, your car had to be modified to have the lights on all the time. And of course, that wasn't common back then. It is now. But back then, you had to have it modified. And of course, this one was already. So anytime you started the car, the headlights were on. That car was pretty good. It got me around, and it was a little better than riding the bus. They did have a bus service on base, and plus we could go off base. The weird thing, when you went off base, you had to go through Icelandic customs. And then when you came back on the base, you would go through Navy security. And they were really weird about certain things coming off the base. You couldn't bring any gas cans. You could just have the gas that was in your car. You could have one pack of opened cigarettes and one pack of not opened cigarettes, but no more than that. And for some weird reason, you couldn't bring cassette tapes. So if your car had a tape deck, you were SOL. You could not bring cassette tapes off the base. I have no idea. But that was their 3 big bugaboos. And the reason being is, gas prices off base was, I think at the time, was $2 a liter, or the equivalent of that, which would make it like $8 a gallon. And, in the early 90s, that was ridiculous. I think on base was $1.45 the whole time I was there, and that was a bit higher than what was average at that time in the States. But it was a lot cheaper, so that was that part. Same thing with cigarettes. I could buy a carton of Marlboros for $6 at the exchange and sell them for $20 a pack off base. But nobody did that, or I didn't do that. And I didn't smoke that much. I did at that time, I believe I was smoking, but I've been quit for many, many years. But back then everybody smoked. That was kind of normal. So again, showing my age here, but let's see some of the other cool things about Iceland. We went to the Hard Rock Cafe in Reykjavik. It was in a mall down there. It's gone now, I understand, but at the time, they were collecting U.S. license plates to tack on the ceiling. Well, I had customized Idaho amateur radio license plates with my call sign on it, and I had my dad take one off my truck and send it to me, and go into Hard Rock Cafe in Reykjavik, and they'd give you a free meal for donating a license plate. So for the longest time, my call sign license plate was nailed to the ceiling in the Reykjavik Hard Rock Cafe. But like I said, I do believe that's gone now. They had a really cool door, or a thing around the door. They had a 59 Cadillac standing on its nose, and the door going into the place was through the Cadillac. They had just had it cut out, and there's a normal door, but that was I do remember that. Of course, it was inside a mall, so. And the other thing I remember the most about it was driving in Reykjavik. It was the first time I'd ever seen a traffic circle or a roundabout. Now they're all over the place. I should do a whole episode about roundabouts here in northern Michigan, but I probably won't. But that was the first place I'd ever dealt with roundabouts. And then in London, a Piccadilly Circle or Piccadilly Circus, of course, that roundabout there is way bigger, and you drive the wrong side of the road and the wrong side of the roundabout. And I never did drive through it, but saw it. It was pretty crazy. But anyway, and I was telling you about that airplane that flew back and forth to London. You could hop a flight on that airplane. It was a P-3 Orion, which is a Navy aircraft, but it was set up like an airliner. And you could hop a flight on there. I think it was $20 round trip, and they'd leave Keflavik at 7 a.m. and get to London about it was an hour and a half, maybe something like that, and stop in Shannon, Ireland, and then somewhere near London. I don't remember what base it was, Mildenhall maybe, but would land there, and then you could grab a bus into London or train or whatever it was and spend the day there. And then if you were back to the airplane by 10 o'clock at night, they would head back. So it was pretty cheap to travel to London or Shannon. Sometimes you jump off at Shannon and spend the day there or spend a night there usually, and then come back. But yeah, so it was definitely a cool place, and cool as in cool, man, not cool as in cold. Although it was cold, it never got above 65 degrees, and never really got below 20 degrees the entire time I was there, not counting wind chill. And the sun, that was the other one. Is this time of year up there, the sun may come up just slightly above the horizon and then go sideways for a couple hours and then drop right back down. So it was mostly dark. We weren't above the Arctic Circle, so the sun did actually come up for a little bit. And then in the summer, like in June and July, the sun never really set. It would go just slightly below the horizon, and then you could see it kind of go sideways across the horizon and then pop right back up. It was very weird coming out of the bar at 2 a.m. and have to put your sunglasses on, but you did. And you got used to it. I don't remember much of the language. I did learn enough of it to get by, but Icelanders at that time even, and it's probably even better now, had a higher literacy rate in English than the U.S. So, that was a required language, although they spoke more British English, but close enough, But anyway, that's just my remembrances of Iceland in the 90s. I did do an episode of All About Iceland, All Things Iceland. I'll have a link in the show notes over at MikeDell.com. This post. There'll be a link to my episode there, which was in May of 2020. I was interviewed about being on the NATO base in Iceland back then. And, who knows if I contradicted myself. That was, almost 6 years ago. So, or at least 5. That was 6. Anyway, math again. But go check that out. She's still doing that show. I understand she's going to become a mother here soon. I haven't listened to it in a long time, but anyway, check that out. All Things Iceland, May of 2020. And I'll be back tomorrow. And I forget what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. Let me see. Oh, yeah, it's Thanksgiving. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Traverse City is kind of a small town still. So I look forward to that, and hopefully you'll listen. Catch me later.